Hi, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thank you for joining me for this IPA talk. Happy to have with me Jennifer Lindsay, who now is Superintendent at North Peak and Marquette Heights, District number 102. Did I get the order of that correct, Jennifer?
Correct.
Excellent, very good. First year in the superintendency there within the district. But prior to that was the principal of Rogers Elementary in that district. And last year was named as the elementary principal of the year. Well, it's still in the current year. I guess we did that in the first part of the 2021 calendar year, latter part of the school year. But Jennifer, thanks for joining me. And it's a real pleasure to have one of our principals of the year here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and appreciate the work of the IPA and the support that you've given to us.
Well, we're grateful to do that. And it's definitely a pleasure for us. So Jennifer, definitely want to get into letting you have an opportunity to share your story and kind of your leadership path and what's brought you to the position that you're in now. But before getting into that, we were kind of talking before we got into the recording that behind you is your COVID testing cart and materials and all that stuff. So, we're definitely still dealing with the pandemic and everything related to it. So be remiss if I didn't ask, how are you doing? How's your school community, your teachers, your kids, parents, all of that? How's it going?
Well, we're hanging in there. I think like a lot of people, we're experiencing some challenges. The tests behind me, we were very committed to keeping kids in school. We all know that's best in all of our districts and all of our schools. And one of the things that we ran into last year is we were quarantining close contact kids that never presented with COVID. And so they were missing, their 10 to 14 days of instruction. And so we've committed to the test to stay program like a lot of people. And even in a small district our size, we've given 75 tests already this week. But that's, a number of kids that would otherwise be placed on remote learning. And that's an extra burden to our teachers and our parents who have to take off work to be with those children at home and to help them with their schoolwork. And we know that they need to be here with their peers. And so our principals have done a really nice job of committing to that and making sure that that gets done so that we can keep kids here to our greatest extent possible.
How many kids do you have in the district there, Jennifer?
We're about 450 pre-K through 8th grade.
Mm-hmm. And so to have 75 tests done so far this week, with that's almost 20%. I mean, maybe you've tested more than people more than once, but still, that's a high percentage.
Right. Those students would have tested twice this week if they're in test to stay. Most of them Monday and Wednesday.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So close to 10% then of your student population. That is significant to be doing that in the first couple of days of the week. So, well, kudos to all of you and your team and the commitment there for that. I definitely know that it's not been easy, and as we continue to slog through. But, at the time of this recording, though, we'll likely put it out after the new year in early 2022. We are in December of 21. And so fortunately, that holiday break is not too far away. And I know people looking for a little bit of rest. And so hopefully you and they will be able to do that. Well, let's get into your story a little bit, Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind just sharing some things about yourself, whatever you're comfortable with. And of course, now you're in your first year as superintendent. I'm sure we'll like to hear a little bit about that and what got you to the point that you're, to where you are right now. But can you just share a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I was a late career teacher. I stayed home to raise some children a little bit. I still have another little one at home, but had entered teaching a little bit later in life in a time when it was really hard to find a teaching job, to be honest. And so I did a lot of substitute teaching and found a district that I connected with, and they had a special ed program. So I stepped in and taught special ed on emergency endorsement and worked through that master's program. And, like many of us that are probably in leadership, it's other people that inspire us to take that next step. And so that was a principal coming to me and saying, hey, have you ever considered being a special ed teacher?
Yeah. And
taking that step and then working in that position in a couple of different districts and having principals and special ed administrators say, hey, have you ever considered being a special ed administrator or a principal? And so I did those things. And so, like you mentioned, I was principal at Rogers. I was also the special ed administrator here for District 102 during my 7 years as principal. And, small district problems, we wear multiple hats sometimes. And so that was my scenario. And, it just took some conversations and with my superintendent at the time saying, hey, I'm retiring in a few years. Have you considered being a superintendent? And, so you take that journey, and it's the nudging of others, I think, that encourage you to step out and try new things. And sometimes it's bold decisions. I didn't think I'd be sitting in this office for sure when I started. But I think that all of those things, they build and they inspire us. The people around us inspire us. And I had people who were influential in my career and in my teaching. And I hope to be the same for those in my charge.
So let me ask you this, Jennifer, and you kind of have to deal with a bit of the context of this because, you're in your first year as superintendent in a pandemic. So there's no doubt that there's some things that are unusual about that. But, when I'm talking with aspiring leaders that are in the classroom and then discussing kind of the mindset shift and things, the paradigm shift that needs to occur when you think about the work as a school leader, and now you've had the opportunity to be in the classroom, the principal of the building, and now a superintendent. Can you talk a little bit about, how you've had to evolve in terms of your own thinking and the way that you look at the work and the type of mind shifts that have been required of you as you kind of progress over time, particularly now in the superintendency, of how you have to approach the work from that vantage point, even compared to, when you were a building leader as a principal?
I think, you're still a teacher. Mm-hmm. And you're still there motivating people. So I think just realizing you go from motivating young minds to motivating adult minds. There's that piece of it. There's also, as the special ed teacher, you're often a fierce advocate for kids and their accommodations and their goals and all of those things. And sometimes maybe even to a fault, right? Yeah. Because, you see that small group of kids you work with. And as you grow as a leader, your vision becomes more global. You realize just how many people you're advocating for, that you're looking out for, and how the work for and with one group, the implications that has for and with another group. You go from taking care of students, which we all continue to do as leaders, to making sure we take care of our teachers. And now I'm in a situation where I'm making sure I take care of my principals. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, I feel like I fail at that sometimes because, as the mandates and the expectations trickle down, I'm in a situation where I'm continuing to ask more and more of them. Yeah. And so it's trying to be mindful of the implications it has for each person that we are working with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and with this is no joke, the school code has doubled in size in the last 20 years in the state of Illinois. And so what's being asked of all educators, particularly school leaders at the building and at the district office, is pretty significant. When people talk about administrative costs or other things like that, it's like, well, there's a reason for that. It's because we're being told to do a whole lot more than what we used to. So you did a great job a couple of months ago presenting at the IPA conference. You were one of the Ignite presenters. In fact, if I remember correctly, you kicked things off, or were pretty close to the beginning group of that.
I think I was number two.
Number two.
Maybe I was first. Yeah, I don't remember. I was kind of in the zone. That's not necessarily my comfort
well, obviously
zone.
I was too, because I can't exactly remember. I just know all of you did an outstanding job. But one of the things that you talked about was the unique situation that you had to work through with for yourself, obviously, as well as your school community as you transitioned from your building principalship into your superintendency, is the fact that you were closing one of the buildings in your district, and it was the school where you were principal at the time. And so I'm just kind of curious about, for those that weren't able to be a part of that terrific night session that you did, though they can watch it on our YouTube channel. We do have it there. Would you mind revisiting that a little bit and just talk about that experience and what it was like for you, and what it meant for the kind of leadership that you had to show in working, both yourself and your teachers, your kids, and your community through that time.
Sure. It's interesting that you bring that up, because going through old notes in my calendar, next week marks a year that we started having those conversations, maybe even as early as this Friday, having those conversations with teachers. And really what it was is we're in a situation where we're experiencing declining enrollment, just like a lot of our smaller districts. And we were operating with 3 buildings. And so by closing a building, we could reduce a principal's salary, a secretary, some of our expenses, and save our taxpayers some money. We had plenty of room in our other 2 buildings. We were keeping the same number of classrooms. We weren't reducing classrooms. We were just relocating teaching staff. But I think if the pandemic's taught us anything, it's how important family is. And sometimes it's our work family. And so Rogers was a family. And it was devastating to learn that they were losing kind of their home. And so we went through some challenges. You talk about making difficult decisions as leaders. That was a tough one. And it was a good decision in terms of finances, in terms of supporting our community, in terms of what services we can provide students, right? Because we had a lot of staff that were moving between multiple buildings and, trying to work schedules to accommodate all of that. And so we had some shared staff, and so we minimized that. But I think just in the midst of everything else, it was just really hard. And they were very unpopular conversations, naturally. But I think one of the things that we learned is, one, we communicated so well. Or tried to, that was a goal, to make sure we were very clear with our intent, our reasons, our data. And I say we, that was not me so much as our board, our superintendent at the time, but really clear with their message and why this was good for our district. But also knowing that we had built relationships with our staff for a long time and with our community. There's that relationship of trust. And I think you can't dismiss that at any level, at any point in time. But because we had that with the individuals that we serve, our students, our community, our teachers, we were able to weather some difficult storms. And in my message, I talked about just really knowing who your key people were. And I think I mentioned it was such an exciting year for me. Being appointed superintendent, obviously my recognition by the IPA, some exciting things going on with my family in terms of moving and things like that, and finishing my program, at Western. So I just had a really good year. And yet this was it was a difficult time, and there's no other way to describe it. And yet knowing that I had worked with that staff for 7 years, and we had a lot of trust. We were able to be vulnerable with one another and have difficult conversations. And I think those things helped us weather that. And so now we're kind of,
can I just real quick ask this question, Jennifer, which makes me wonder, do you feel like it was just a process of, through the relationships and the things that you had built, but letting people have the opportunity to grieve what was taking place, right? I mean, it's.
Absolutely. It was a grief process. And, I had mentioned that to our board. We have a couple new board members, and I was trying to describe to them a little bit about what it was like. And I think I mentioned this in my Ignite as well. It was the grief process. They went through all of those stages. And one of my board members, he looked at me and he said, well, what's the final stage of grief? And I thought, well, I don't know. And he says, it's normalization. Yeah. And he said, that's what you're doing now. So, new routines and new procedures and relationships are changing and evolving, and new relationships with colleagues are being built. And so we're on that side of things, and we're starting to see some really positive outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you approach the year then, with working to bring people together this school year?
It was a little bit easier in one building, in our elementary building, because our 3rd grade students that relocated there had been housed there in the past. Okay. So the idea wasn't as foreign, and that was predated my time with the district. But the idea wasn't as foreign to them. And so they were able to accommodate. I think people realize that third grade and second grade, they aren't that different. We can make this work. It was a different idea to take and put fourth and fifth graders in a middle school environment. And what does that look like? But so we had remodeled some classrooms to make that happen. So there's, the newness and the excitement of a new classroom. Our principals have been working on doing some staff bonding. Yeah. And that's an interesting dynamic when you promote within your district and how your role changes a little bit with staff. And so letting him take that leadership with them. And, but yeah, it's a lot of, again, it all comes back to relationships. So it's finding those opportunities where they can have that dialogue and have that time together. Some of it's rooted around instruction and academics and articulation. And then other times it's just fun events that they have planned to spend time together and get to know one another.
Sure. That's terrific. Well, let's chat a little bit about the transition from principal to superintendency for you. And of course, we're extremely supportive of that. I think people sometimes are like, well, the principal heads to the dark side and is a superintendent and yada, yada, yada. I'm like,
they said the same thing though when I moved from teacher to principalship, right?
That is true. I think that's the difference. Well, I'm going to show my geekiness here with Star Wars, but I think it's when you move to the principalship, you become Darth Vader. When you become the superintendent, it's like the Sith Lord and the Emperor and all that stuff. So for those Star Wars folks out there, there's a little nod towards you. But I'm always like, listen, as an association, we want to be supportive of good leaders becoming superintendents because that helps make sure that we've got good principals that want to stay in schools. And of course, we want that relationship with good superintendents as an association. That's why we work as closely and collaboratively as we can with IASA, the Illinois Association of School Administrators, have them at our conference presenting about the superintendency, and then even partner up with the School Board Association a little bit, helping them with search work that they do and with regards to the superintendency as well. The other thing I say is, like, I've known superintendents all my life. I mean, my dad was one a long time before he retired and now works at IASB, but and was my principal for a long time. But like, superintendents are good people and we need those folks doing that work. For you, what was that journey like when you were approached? Byron Sondergroth was your superintendent. I've known him a long time. Actually, he was moving into a principalship, and I interviewed to replace him as AP, and I ended up not doing that years ago, but have enjoyed watching him and staying engaged with him and his career over time. But I know he talked to you about that, and so what was going on for you, and what did you feel like you really needed to make sure you were doing to be ready to be sitting in the seat that you're in right now?
I think I went to Byron some time ago and I said, I'm in this class and they're telling me, your first position, you really should follow somebody who struggled because, then you have that opportunity to be successful. I said, that's not my case at all. How am I going to fill these shoes? I
don't know that I believe that, by the way.
I don't know if I do either. And in this case, I had his endorsement. And I was following somebody who's recognized as being a well-respected leader. And the board also was conscious in their decision to name his replacement early on. And so that was in November of 2020. So we had all of that time to work pretty closely together. And of course, with any superintendent program, you have the internship and those types of things. And as each course comes around, you sit down and you do the finance course, you sit shoulder to shoulder and go through AFRs and budgets and those types of things. But I text him from time to time. Yesterday, I text him. I'm like, thank you for being so organized. I needed this and I knew exactly where it was. Yeah. But we had that time together to make that transition flow smoothly. I know that's not every scenario for every person. Sometimes you're walking into a new seat in a new office where you don't know how things have been stored or they haven't been left in the same situation. And I'm fortunate I still have him at my disposal if I need to text or call or ask a question. And again, I have resources. We did a lot of planning from the get-go together. as far as what the transition would look like. And, every email became a to-do item on my calendar for the next year. So I knew when it was rolling around again, those types of things. And so I have systems in place. I was supported to be successful through systems that were established. And I, again, we're a district where we're small and we value those relationships. Again, I just keep coming back to that.
Sure.
But we have that relationship with our schools. And so, people aren't afraid to come in the office and ask a question or, what does this look like during the transition? Or I don't know if you had this conversation with Byron, but he and I had discussed this. What are your thoughts on continuing? Those types of things. And so it's been very fluid that way. From a systems standpoint, and then just knowing that I had his endorsement, his encouragement, that helped a lot. Knowing that somebody has enough confidence in you to recommend you to take that step. Again, just growing our own leaders, just like we're wanting to grow teachers from the classroom into the principalship. I think we're finding ourselves, every week I get superintendent search emails that come out. And so we're in the same scenario there. And so it really is important that when we find those people, we identify them. And again, it's different. I do a lot more paperwork and spend a lot more time in an office. I jokingly told somebody I've gained some weight, which is true. That's not a joke, but it's because I'm sitting so much more. I'm not as active and in classrooms and in the hallways and moving around that much. And that's the piece I miss. I do miss being more engaged with students. But with the pandemic as it is, there's been situations that arise where I've stepped in or helped or COVID test or, you can be in the hall, you can be at events and be present still as the superintendent of a district. And so I've been able to do some games and concerts and a couple community events and you're still plugged in that way. I think my fear is that as time goes on, I won't know as many families as closely as I know now.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I can understand that. Absolutely. And at this time, it's kind of all hands on deck though, right?
Right.
Ready for everything. The articles we're seeing now about principals, of course, subbing, doing janitorial work, whatever's necessary to get the job done. Let me ask you this though, that maybe aspiring superintendents that are sitting in principal seats right now might be curious about. Like, was there anything about the job that surprised you coming in that maybe you weren't quite expecting? Of course, working with Byron, I'm sure, he was able to enlighten you and prep you for quite a bit. But even with that being said, for example, when I stepped in this role at IPA, which has been several years ago now, I knew there would be politics involved, but I thought of that mostly in terms of the General Assembly. And I didn't think about how still there were so many different organizations and, of course, the state board, the regional offices, the influences there. And I really had to work hard to figure some of that out. So even while you think you have some familiarity with it, there's always some things like, whoa, I wasn't quite anticipating that. So anything that kind of just caught you a little bit that might be good for others to hear?
I think it's that constant change in information. And I think our principals live this too, with the pandemic and the ISB guidance constantly changing. But you talk about the politics and the policy and all of that, but it is, policy review is ongoing through press. And, if anybody's seen the latest press update, it's huge. So then you're constantly sitting through and filtering through those things to see what impacts our day-to-day in the school, who needs to be aware of this change, who needs to be aware of that one, and making sure you notify people. So it really is, a mass number of organizations, a mass number of emails, and trying to filter out and prioritize, when do I need to address this and how and that type of thing. So I think that was a little bit alarming, just with how the amount of information overload and how quickly it changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jennifer, as we kind of come to a close here, a question I've got for you, and I want to preface it by saying this is you can't, I know what people want to defer to, and they're right on the money and correct when they say this, but I'm going to say that you have to say something else. And that is that when I ask you this question, you can't say your staff, because we all know that that's going to be the first thing out of your mouth. But I'm curious about just more personally, from a leader's perspective, when you think about the success that you had, being able to be principal of the year, and of course now moving in the superintendency, what's been critical to allow for you to have that success. And it's okay to brag on yourself a little bit here with this. You've obviously done some good work. And I know your team is one of the things that comes to top of mind. And I've been in your school, and you've got good people there. You've got good board members there. I had a chance to meet some of them when I was there, when we were introducing you as the elementary principal of the year. But, what do you think is real critical for school leaders and in order to be able to do the things that you've done and are now doing?
I think being bold. I told you ahead of time, this isn't my comfort zone. You're asking me to step in front of the camera again.
Yeah.
But I think being bold, and not necessarily with being in front of people, but just in general, being willing to take risk and try new things, because it was just one step in front of the other, one course after the other, learning one new thing after the other, that got me here. But I think the other piece of that is just recognizing, like you said, what's critical. And I think my family support in getting me here, my husband, my children, it's been important for me that my girls see that mom can do hard things. And
we had that conversation in our house about, you can do hard things. Not just my wife, but my kids, absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, I always tell my girls, and I have a son too, he's younger, but be kind, work hard. And I tell my kids, don't do dumb things because they're teenagers. but that's just it. Be kind to those around you, value who you're working with and what you're working for. But work really hard, set your goals, and it doesn't matter what those are, but you do it with all your might. And we have an employee here in second career with our district, doing something else after retirement, and very early on he told me, Mrs. Lindsay, it doesn't matter what job you have, you work hard when you do it. And I thought, what, you're right. It doesn't matter, and each role in our school is important. But my family has been super supportive in all of this. And, sometimes it was an inconvenience to get here, when you're doing weekend classes, or, sometimes I have to miss one of their events because I'm coming to a school event and things like that. But valuing them, prioritizing them, and they understand, they get what it's about. And so I think they've been critical to the whole thing.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Jennifer, Lindsay, thanks for joining me for this. Has been a great conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. And I just, thanks for all you do through the IPA. I really am appreciative of my work with the organization. Very early on, I sat through an aspiring principals workshop there in Springfield.
Yep.
And so I appreciate.
And look what I got you to now, right?
Right.
We'll take a little credit, not a bunch. You and your family and your folks there in the school district deserve the majority of it. We'll take just a little piece of it.
No, you were absolutely invaluable through my principalship, and I appreciate the work that you do. And I would just, encourage our principals to hang in there. I know it's hard, and just remember your why and what we're doing, and the purpose that we serve.
Agreed. Well, thanks again for joining me. Again, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of IPA, with Jennifer Lindsay, who is now Superintendent of North Pekin Marquette Heights School District number 102, former principal of Rogers Elementary, and the 2020-2021 Elementary Principal of the Year here in the state of Illinois. As always, if there's anything IPA can do for you, you can check us out on the web at www.ilprincipals.org or give us a call anytime. Take care.